Hello and welcome to the Writers of the Future panel. So we're breaking this into two parts. The first is we're going to be able to address each one of us a few points about how to win Writers of the Future and on writing short stories. And then Todd is going to do an introduction to Never Seen Before. It's a 5-minute video of his mom, Anne McCaffrey. And so we'll start first of all, since this will probably be the easiest way to get this out of the way. Who are you next to me?
I'm Brandon Sanderson.
He writes books.
I write books.
Yeah, and he never won Writers of the Future.
I never won Writers of the Future. As Darci is quick to point out, who did win Writers of the Future.
That would
But
be
he got
me.
an honorable mention certificate.
I got a certificate.
Okay, so Darci.
Oh, and Eric. Eric won, but kind of only won. He mini won.
I'm Eric James Stone. I've had over 50 short stories published in various magazines and a novel out from Baen. And I won second place in my quarter at Writers of the Future.
Woohoo!
And I'm Darci Stone. I married Eric after he was already a published author. And since I couldn't let him one-up me, I won first place in my quarter.
Well, I won a Nebula Award from the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America for a novelette I wrote.
And that trophy has a lot of glitter. But if we're going for size, I also won the Golden Pen Award at Writers of the Future.
Baker.
All right. Next.
I didn't win anything.
It's all right, I didn't either.
I'm Todd McCaffrey. I am a judge. I did not win anything, apparently. Well done. I've seen those. My mom won one. She also won the Nebula Grandmaster Award. So you guys got to work on that one.
Yeah.
What does the Grandmaster Award look like?
It looks a lot
It's
like
like
that,
one of
except
those?
prettier.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Now, actually, I can claim some fame that'll probably drive everybody nuts. These things are made up. This is lucite, and there's a little, you can see there's a little nebula or really a globular cluster in there, whatever you want to call it, and then planets and all. When I was very, very young, my mother was one of the earliest people in the science fiction writers. She was the secretary treasurer, and she made me make all of the galaxies for the year that it won, you know, which is, it's just clear and stuff, but kind of like it started out cool and then it ended up being hard. And now, like years later, I'm going like, there are people carrying around my nebulas. So now I want them back. But this is good. And I am, of course, Anne McCaffrey's son, as you may have heard, and that's, you know, part of the reason we're here today.
Exactly. Okay, and a little bit more besides this, you write books?
I write books. They've heard me talk too much. I've been talking all this weekend. I write various things, but I am also a judge at Writers of the Future, and I did try to win several times, but never did.
Also, he broke the universe with his latest Kickstarter, if you guys aren't familiar with it. And we are all in awe, and we're going to learn from him. Steal, you know, the rule is steal from the best, file off the serial numbers.
Yes, I can tell you very easily how to do a $42 million Kickstarter, and that is start with an enormous fan base. Yeah, so just once you do that, then you can do it.
Everything falls in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and Moon.
All right. I'm Wulf Moon. I wrote my first science fiction story. It was the last award at the national level, and an editor at Science Fiction. My first professional sale when I was 15. went out to 500,000 schools across America. So I'm still trying to be, let's say, 150, 500,000. But after that, I won about 40 awards, over 40 awards in writing, another 30 in public speaking, including Star Trek Strange New Worlds. So I'm a Star Trek author in the canon. And then the most wonderful thing I've been working on for decades, winning Writers of the Future with my story, Super Duper Moon Girl and the Amazing Moon Dawdler. And as soon as I won, I turned around and said, you know, I want to go help other people figure this out so they don't have to go through all the headbanging against the wall that I did. So inside of the Writers of the Future Forum, I did the super secrets of writing a thread that I just started to help people. And that grew and grew into Wulf Moon Super Secrets, which I now have my first indie publication. I was here at FanX booth. And this is concentrated that I developed help people in 8 secret shop. And publishing with Writers of the Future. One of my clients is all of my clients. So I'm very happy, and it's right here is one of them proves that it works on Zach's. Thank you for having me here today. Right.
Hello, I'm Kary English. I'm a Hugo finalist and Astounding finalist. I won the contest in volume 31, and it was first place. I didn't bring my trophy. I didn't know we were doing show and tell. I thought it was only tell.
I never leave home without my trophy.
So relevant to this particular panel, I'm a slow reader for the contest. And so in order to win this thing, you have to get by me. But I want you all to know that if you're writers, you're on a deadline, because the deadline for the next quarter is the 31st, 30th. How many days we got?
30 days in September.
Yes. Okay. So you guys only have about a week. Get your stories in, and I want to see them all on my desk. Come on, do it.
Okay, Zach.
I am ZT. I serve science fiction and fantasy stories. As Moon said, one of his pupils that helped me get over the finish line here for Writers of the Future. I was published in the most recent volume, 38. I was also the winner of the inaugural Mike Resnick Memorial Award. And since we are doing show and tell, I've got my little trophy from that. And most recently, a story in the Murder Birds anthology, which is in Kickstarter now. We're not quite at 42 million yet, but you can check that out, zbright.com. You can get all the details there. And my story happens to be the free preview story, so you can go read that now. Thanks.
Hi, I am Martin L. Shoemaker. I am a winner, third place in the first quarter of volume 31. Kary was also volume 31, so therefore by votes, volume 31 is clearly the best volume here. The others are pretty darn good too, but we have some pride. Since then, I've had a Nebula nomination for my story Today I Am Paul. I'm losing track of how many short stories published in different anthologies and magazines. And I had a story coming out of Writers of the Future, the 24-hour story workshop, when we talk about that. My 24-hour story ended up as a top military and adventure science fiction for the year, volume 4, I think that was. So that's something that I got specifically from this contest. And my career is just, from there, just kept going. I had the #1 science fiction book on all of Amazon for the entire month of October 2019. Part of that traces to lessons learned through this contest.
Great. All right, so now, just as a real quick overview, Writers of the Future was a contest, a program created by L. Ron Hubbard in 1983. It's now ready to end its 39th year at the end of this month, and we're heading into the 40th year starting October 1st. It's the one contest that exists out there, unlike any other contest, because it's a true meritocracy. The judges only see your story, if you're an illustrator, the art, and a number. They have no idea of your age, sex, nationality, ethnicity, anything. It's just strictly by the merit of your work that you will win. And so anybody that's published in this series, you're the ones who the judges say are the best of the best. As the contest administrators, we don't see anything until we get it back from the judges at number 57, 233, whatever it is. And that's to find out who the winners are. So we have no nothing on that. It's free to enter the contest. The only requirement is that you're not yourself a professional, and it's up to 17,000 words. We have entries from over 175 countries, and each year we have winners, usually from 8 different countries. It's really national and international in scope. So that's something that's been going on. Everything's funded. The winners are flown out to Hollywood for a week-long workshop taught by judges. Todd is there regularly. Brandon's there.
Once.
And sometime in the future, he'll be there again. And
Soon.
but it's tough. And then we have a big Hollywood Gala bash where we celebrate all the winners. And we usually have about 30 media that attend and cover this gala. And several celebrities come and help make the presentations. And it's a real fun thing. But the main thing on it is to help inaugurate some amazing careers for both writers and artists. And many of the winners have gone on to very, very successful careers. And we work with you a lot to be able to make that happen even after the win. We set you with media, book signings, and we still do media for winners that have won 10, 15, 20 years ago. If they can you do something, we absolutely will. We also have a Writers of the Future podcast, which right now is a finalist in 2 categories of the People's Choice Podcast Awards. Each episode gets about 1.5 million listens. And it's very, very successful as well in terms of providing tips and helping the aspiring writer with what you can do to be able to continue to persevere. So with that, one of the things we want to talk about in this is story prompts and how to win the contest. So it doesn't mean that everybody here has won the contest and we've already established, but in terms of story prompts for short fiction, which is a bit different for long fiction, I'll start with Brandon and I'll handle his disclaimer saying, well, I don't really write a lot of short fiction. He has written short fiction. It's one of them is published in volume 34. So Brandon.
Okay. Yes, by short fiction, we mean under 200,000 words, right? So you want basically short story advice is what you're looking at. Yeah. When I am judging the stories, I am looking for the classic things that make a story work. I am looking for an introduction that introduces me to a character, and I'm seeing the world through that character's eyes. I am not looking for info dumps. I don't need you to start off with like a bang in the traditional sense. Like some people say here, you need to start out your story strong. I'm not looking, it doesn't have to start with an action scene, but I am looking for a character. And I am looking very strongly at, can you write prose that evokes an entire world and invokes a character without telling me all about it? And then, of course, because it is short fiction, it turns on the ending a little bit more for me than longer fiction does. The short story kind of gets in, does something different, unique, original, or surprising, and then gets out. And that's one of my main criteria is, did this feel different? I feel like short fiction is a little bit better when it's a little more experimental. So
great, thank you. And Todd?
Actually, I was going to say the same thing. No, I'm a great believer in character, and in a good short story, you can give us a whole new world, a whole new character, and a change. Something that I remember is what I'm looking for. Something that affects me deeply, whether it's an, oh my gosh, this is such a cool idea, or, oh wow, I'm so sorry the triple died, whatever it is, something that's getting a real pull and a feel to it. You'll know you're doing a good story when the emotions are in you and coming out on the paper.
Great. And then Darci and Eric.
I'm going to focus a bit on the whole prompt issue because a lot of my stories have been written based on prompts I've gotten from someone else that have sparked my imagination. When I was a published finalist with Writers of the Future, before I was a winner, I went to the workshop and Tim Powers gave me a packet of sugar and said, pretend it's salt. And so I started researching salt. And I found that some people thought that salt was cursed because Judas at the Last Supper spilled salt. And combining that with the idea of an artist, because the other thing we had to do was interview someone, and I ended up interviewing a caricature artist on Hollywood Boulevard by paying him to do my caricature. And so I then combined those two ideas together and came up with a painter who uses this cursed salt to essentially get his soul out of his body and into his paints so he can do magical things with his paints. And so that comes from, hey, this is, you pretend it's salt. You can develop a prompt and take it in all sorts of weird directions.
And I don't have a lot to add except for, I mean, just remember they're reading thousands of stories. So there needs to be something about your story that is different. If it just reminds them of the other 20 stories they read, even if it's well written, you're less likely to move to the next step. So try to think of something that's unique that hasn't already been done 100 times.
Great. Moon?
So as to prompts, join the Writers of the Future forum. And on the thread, the Super Secrets, every Monday I post a new prompt for writers. So join the forum, it will help you win this contest. And then those prompts, the writers that are following along with it, do them, like Zach or Zeet, I call him. He did one of those prompts and that turned into his Resnick Award winner. So doing prompts is important because every anthology, almost all of them will say, we want you to write a story about space unicorns. All right, they won't all tell you that, thankfully, but they will say, this is what we wanted on. If you've been doing prompts regularly, you'll be able to write a fresh, original story on the very thing they're asking for, and you'll be ahead of 90% of the other writers who tagged on a space unicorn on their medieval warfare story. So you'll actually have a chance of selling to that anthology. The other thing that I work with writers on is heart's desire. If you can create an emotional story by finding the very heartfelt thing that your character wants and build your entire story around that, you can win not just Writers of the Future, but anything. So I really encourage you to do that.
Great. Kary?
Alrighty, I'm going to give you a couple of don'ts. So even though we're a contest, we are a market and we're a PG-13 market. So that means that you need to leave the strong profanity out of the story. We won't print the F-bomb. So if it's in your story, it might not get an absolute rejection, but it's going to keep you from winning. We also won't print racial or ethnic slurs, not even if they're coming out of the mouth of your villain, or if you're saying, oh, but this person is bullying my character and that's why they used the N-word. We still won't print it. Look up standard manuscript format and follow it, please. I've had stories submitted on black backgrounds with rainbow bolded text and it's too hard to read. So let's see what else. No fan fiction. I love fan fiction. I've read fan fiction, I've written it, but we don't accept it because it's a copyright problem. No song lyrics, also a copyright problem because we can't be chasing down whether or not it's public domain. So those are some don'ts, and that will help you avoid some of the very common pitfalls. So, short story contest, no novels, no screenplays, no poetry, no Amtrak receipts. I have an Amtrak receipt that someone submitted. I think it was performance art, but so short stories, please. Flash fiction is okay. Drabbles, probably not.
Right.
When I worked on a magazine in college, I'm just curious to know, we got in a row like 3 stories that had the same quote unquote twist ending. I'm curious if you see this all the time or not. We had it was secretly the Garden of Eve and they're Adam and Eve. We got that like 3 different stories in a row. So we made it kind of meme, never do that in your story. Do you see that?
Absolutely. The whole, oh, they're Adam and Eve. Oh my God. It still happens. We still get a number of those. A couple quarters back, it was flying whales. I don't know where the flying whales came from, but there were several stories about flying whales. Sometimes I think that it's an anthology where these are the stories that didn't make the anthology call, or sometimes I think that they could be from his prompts. We had some really good stories that had to do with tree roots. And they fortunately were very different. They weren't like all copycat of the same story, but yeah, sometimes we see themes. And we still occasionally get the story about the brave sperm fighting its way to the egg.
Have you been getting a lot of pandemic stories?
Yes. Oh, and look, it's been going on for 3 years now. So the only pandemic story that's ever made it past me, it wasn't COVID. You could tell it was kind of COVID adjacent, but it had vampires and cops in it. And it was really, really cool. But I have rejected a lot of stories that's like, COVID turns people into zombies. So it does need to be, it needs to be original. And the problem with COVID turns people into zombies is that it won't be fiction in a couple of years because we'll know, no, it didn't. Or we'll know, yeah, it did. So
That being said, my story that won in 2018 was about a pandemic that started in China. So
Go figure.
Be ahead of the curve, not behind.
Okay. Okay, ZT.
To Kary's point about a short story contest, if you're trying to win or get published in short stories, I think if you're trying to get there and you haven't gotten there yet, you've probably got a problem with pacing. You're probably trying to write really short novels in a novelish way. And so working on your pacing, as Brandon said, kind of getting into an interesting beginning and making all your tri-fail cycles and your characters' attempts to do something snappy and quick and pull the reader through. You don't have time to send your characters on side quests and all that sort of thing in a short story. So get in, get out, and make it snappy.
Okay, Martin.
All right, I want to preface this with a comment because I'm about to crash the party on some of what came here before. I was reading recently on a phenomena they call open label placebo. It's a test with placebo for controls where they tell you you're getting the placebo and people still feel better because there's something going on in the psychology of this, which is why I'm about to say something that's going to have them all scream at me. Prompts are bollocks. They're useful bollocks. It's like the placebo effect. The real point is you're not moving right now on your writing. The prompt is to trick you to get moving. And if the prompt is off in that way, and you write a great story off in that direction, that's a win. Unless you're trying to meet a very specific theme, that's a win. So when we talk to you about prompts, don't feel like you're failing if you can't follow the prompt. If you start producing words, keep moving.
Thank you on that. Now, what I'm going to do here is Todd's going to introduce this short video of his mom, Anne, and then we're going to open up the rest of the panel to questions. So we have the microphone set up there. So if anybody has questions for anybody in the panel, you can queue up there. But anyway, so Todd, please, a quick little intro to Anne McCaffrey.
So mom became a judge, gosh, I can't remember when, years back now, over 25 years ago. And she always believed in pay it forward. And what we're going to have here is a quick video made up from interviews with her, advice from a master, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
The Writers of the Future contest is a fine one. There's nothing else quite like it in the world. I wish I had published before because I could have used the training they get here. I think it's a marvelous thing that L. Ron Hubbard has done, and it's the best memorial he could possibly have. When I first heard about the contest, Algis Budrys, who was one of the organizers, was telling me all about it. I think it's a marvelous idea. And of course, I got hung with it. I didn't mind. It was interesting to see what people were writing about and how they were handling new material. So I've been a judge ever since. I'm damn proud of it. The Writers of the Future contest gives them a great deal of confidence, for one thing. Somebody wants to publish something they've written. It's hard enough to write and to get published. This at least offers them an opportunity of having their stories seen very quickly. And some of them have gone on to do very, very well indeed. Oddly enough, although there are many processes between your sending the story off and getting it published, if you mean it from the depth of your heart, that emotion comes across to the reader. And very often you've read a book and it's because the writer himself or herself was not involved enough with the storytelling. That's, I tell people, tell me a story and write it. That's the hard work, putting the bum down in the chair and the hands on the keyboard and doing it. But I've had quite a few people who have actually sat down and done it and then set it off. And a good percentage of them have been published because they meant the story they were writing. Many people come up and say, I have this marvelous story. I said, well, sit down and write it. Oh, I couldn't. I said, why not? But you're published into, I said, it has nothing to do with it. If I tell the facts of your story, it will not be the story you would write because your involvement makes a difference. And that's true. In one of my first stories, The Ship Who Sang, I used emotion, grief, as a main mechanism behind it. And I can't read the story aloud. I usually have a script. I get somebody else to do the last part because I always burst into tears. And I was doing an interview at one of the British conventions, and the BBC was filming us, and they were right in front of me. And my son was doing the other part, who is now a writer, published writer. And we got to the part where I stopped and let him take over. And I looked over at the cameraman, and they were crying. My golly, that story still is worth something when you can make BBC hardened cameramen cry. I have felt every single story I have ever written. And at one point, the story itself required me to kill two of my great characters, Master Harper Robinson and Ivos, the artificial intelligent voice address system, which is how my people, 2,000 years away from his ordination, if you want to call it, he was able to figure out the linguistic changes between the then and the now. Both had become so important to the inhabitants, they were relying on them instead of their own wisdom, which they had plenty of. So the Avos turned himself off, and Robinson died because there is a time for everything. That I use as the last flicker on the. Make me do it again. But the tears were streaming down my face because I was killing a marvelous person. But he too knew that the time had come for him to go. Oh Lord, everyone gets mad at me for killing my people, but it's sometimes dramatically necessary. I invent worlds where things can happen that couldn't happen here, and problems that arise that wouldn't happen here, but they are ineluctably, a gorgeous word, tarnished by what is going on in the world around me. I can't avoid that. And every now and then I get some good people goes into this work. It is lonely, but oh, the reward when you see your name in the bookshop. That's mine. It's great. There's nothing else quite like it. If there's anyone listening to this who would like to write, I would recommend highly that they finish a story and send it into the L. Ron Hubbard Writers of the Future, because some of them are writers of the future.
Yes, that was the world premiere of that one. Okay, and just so you know, we do have our Writers of the Future booth is literally right across the hall and at 1713, and you're welcome to come over there and get copies of various books and stuff. And tomorrow, pretty much throughout the day, we're going to have past winners there signing books. So let's start now with their Q&A. So ladies first.
This is for the panel in general. In your experience, has based on a true stories made it and been had a fair chance.
Can you insert a speculative element?
Yeah, I mean, it
Yeah,
needs to be
prominent
sci-fi or fantasy.
speculative element.
My grandma was a Black Widow in real life, and I've always thought about making like a fictional story off of her. Just kind of around
Yeah.
that, removing certain elements.
They need to see some magic or some fantasy early in, and it needs to be integral to the plot. So if you can modify the true story to cover that, you could have something great.
My winning story happens to be about somebody from my very tiny, tiny town who had a tragic death, and I turned him into Poseidon. So it needs a speculative element, but yes, you can do it.
Great. Okay, yes?
So my question is, we talked a little bit about, keeping our pacing in check. Every time I try to write a short story, I end up writing a novella. What are some methods you could suggest to pull back on that pacing and
Kill every adverb you ever found. Anything that ends in ly should die. All right. Consider. Oh, quickly. All right. See, now you added an adverb. That was unnecessary. Notice how you held the timing and all. Notice how much time you spent on this. That would be the first thing that's going to speed it up. Look at always take scenes late and end early. If people have to walk into a coffee shop, no, they're just sitting there right now. They've already got their coffee, whatever. Look at that. If you're saying you've got a novella and you want to make you've got 20,000 words, you want to make 7,000 words out of it. Now you got a job to do. All right. So you're going to go through and say, I'm pulling this down. I'm writing it tighter.
Yeah.
It's doable.
And you can do 17,000 words. Like the story that I got an honorable mention for was like 16,950 words, right? And you can go up to 17,000.
Yeah.
That said, I will maybe buck the trend here a little bit. If you naturally don't write at this length, like it may not be what you want to write. That's an odd thing to say on a short story panel, but if you want to write short stories, you need to be reading them, getting short story collections, seeing what other people are doing, and internalizing that pacing. It is very different. And it may just not work for you. I didn't write a single short story until I'd finished something like 8 novels. And because the novel form was actually more natural to me. And it was after that I started studying it, reading short stories, and then started to get better at it.
And I also will say, like, one thing my husband is really good at is implying a tremendous amount of world building with like 2 sentences. And I don't know how he does it, but it is possible.
What was the famous 6-word short story? For sale, baby shoes, never used. Notice I just killed you with a story right there. 6 words, guys. So something to think about. One thing, I agree that longer allows you to do a lot more, but sometimes shorter can be just so amazing.
And sometimes that a lot more you don't need if your target is short. A very rough mathematical rule of thumb is 2 characters are twice as big of a story as 1, but 3 characters are 6 times as big. 4 characters are 10 times as big. Look for those characters and say, do I need all of them to concentrate on the gem?
Good. All right.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yes.
so I'm just wondering, I know failure happens a lot, like you submit your story and it doesn't go through, or you get submitted and it goes through, but you don't win. I'm just curious, for those of you who actually did submit in the contest and win, how many times did you submit before actually
We'll let
winning?
Moon
Yeah,
address
Wulf,
Okay.
want to answer that?
I probably entered over 40 times. And I'm a novelist disguising himself as a short story writer. But I wanted to perfect short story first before I moved on. I didn't want to write the 8 novels first. Sorry, Brandon. I wanted to have something first and then move to that so that my first one will sell. That was just my thing that I wanted to do. And I knew I could win Writers of the Future. So it was incredibly frustrating to me that I would get semifinalist and I couldn't hit it. But I had to learn to kill my darlings. And when you hit semifinalist, you get a critique from the coordinating judge, which was David Farland at that time. And he said, Moon, he said, on a level of world building alone, your story was probably greater than all the other stories that were submitted. He said, and I so wanted to make it a winner, but you have to learn to kill your darlings. And that's the problem when we begin writing, that we think we have to stick everything in there but the kitchen sink so people understand it. Instead, trust your readers that they know all of that stuff or will get it. And that's why Eric's trick works, where you can hint at a few things very smartly and it will open up gigantic worlds like the Argonauts and Lord of the Rings. It says so much just seeing those giant statues there as they pass along by.
Right.
So does the no fan fiction rule extend to public domain works? For example, would a work involving Cthulhu or Hamlet, but he's a werewolf now, be an automatic reject?
So if it's a public domain work, it's okay, but all of it has to be public domain. For instance, there are parts of Sherlock Holmes that are not, and we're not going to take the risk because we don't have time to chase down whether or not you did all your homework. Also, there's an originality problem when you're writing in someone else's universe, and it will be harder for your story to be as original as completely made up stories. So yes, you can do it. Even when you're using like vampires and werewolves, we've had vampire stories win. We've had werewolf stories win. But you have to have an original vampire, werewolf, Cthulhu story. So yes, but be careful.
Thank
Be
you.
original.
All right. So mine is, what internal conflict is a timeless go-to for future writers?
What internal conflict for a character you talking about, or is it conflict
Yes,
that drives
'cause
us?
We all know that stories are usually driven by the internal conflict of a character, but a lot of times there's very many because you want to be able to relate to the reader. So what timeless one is there you could go to?
The most famous one is the conflict between what you want and what you need. This is the classic one that's brought up. The character coming to learn that the thing they wanted, they need to give up for something that they need or that is a greater need. And that's like the most famous one, I think.
Yeah.
A variation on that is putting in conflict what the person wants most and what they fear the most.
Mm.
And a slight variation from there is identity. There's, I forget the great screenwriter who argued that all great internal conflicts ultimately come down to who you really are, which is part of that conflict of want versus need and so on.
So is that like a good one that anyone can go to and that would really work?
I mean, all of these can. It just depends on the story you're writing. Make it personal to you. Start with that. Like, pick a conflict from your life, expand that into a character.
Yeah, please don't make the mistake of writing for us.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be writing for you. Then you want, David Gerald has this great thing. He says, I write what I want and you pay for the privilege of reading over my shoulder. And that's, I'm really, the stuff you love, that's what you want to work on. And you get because it's not you. What's interesting about your stories is you are writing them.
Thank you.
Great.
So in like talking about mental health in books, how do you, especially if you don't want to use the words that we currently have assigned to certain disorders, how do you bring that up without using words like hysteria, which are rather damaging to the people who experience those mental health problems?
That's an excellent question. I have to do this a lot in the types of stories I'm writing. And it is something I've had to ask myself. I go to as many primary sources as I can with people describing what it feels like. And if you read enough people discussing something like depression or even something like dissociative identity disorder, you will see themes in the way they describe the feeling of living with these kinds of disorders. And if you get those descriptions right, the people for whom that's the most important, the people who feel that will see that and be like, all right, this works. And at that point, you don't necessarily need to use the terminology. And I think you are right. I would stay away from some of because what happens is a medical term becomes used by the public and then becomes stigmatized repeatedly through history. And so you're left with the current terms, which are very clinical or our past terms, which have become stigmatized. And I would recommend you are complete. I just want to put a point on that so people understood what you're saying. Go to the primary sources, read people's journals. You live in a wonderful time for understanding other human beings because so many people are willing to give primary sources for you on that.
And
that's
if
what's
you
worked
have
for me.
access to any sensitivity readers, that's also great too.
Oh yeah.
To kind of just get their input.
Depending on what you're writing about, I would find access to them before you publish, regardless. It depends on the thing. Some things, you know, you can draw on your own. Like to do DID, I needed the readers. I couldn't have released the book without it. And boy, I'm so glad that I did get them.
Thank you.
Great. Yes.
So are you guys strictly sci-fi and fantasy, or do you dabble in other genres of fiction? Is it just is
This contest here is speculative fiction, so it's fiction, fantasy, alternate history, dark fantasy, but some speculative fashion to it. We do have the free online writing workshop that you can find on writersofthefuture.com, which gives all the different steps of how to write a short story, beginning and middle and end. That was taught with videos by Orson Scott Card, Dave Farland, and Tim Powers. And we've had journalists take it and help their writing. We've had other mystery writers have submitted and won awards by using this material. So this program here specifically is speculative fiction, but what you're given here applies to any fiction writing.
And I also know, I mean, the bigger question, sometimes if authors write in very different genres, they will sometimes use different pen names so that the audience knows, like, oh, this one is science fiction and this one is romance novel, because they use a different pen name for each type of novel.
Right, thanks. Yes.
Hello. For this contest specifically, like, what would you suggest is a good length for a short story?
3,000 to 5,000 words, Kary?
So anything from flash fiction up to 17,000 words you can enter. And speaking only statistically, the winners, the sweet spot tends to be from 4,000 to about 7,000 words. Now, that doesn't mean you can't win with 2,500, and it doesn't mean you can't win with 15,000, but that's where we see most of the winners fall. And when I say most, I'm talking maybe it's just a plurality. It might not be a majority. So,
okay, thank you.
Okay, yes.
Okay, you kind of answered this a little bit, but how would you suggest someone to get into like these genres that are oversaturated, like sci-fi, vampires, zombies, stuff like that?
Do you mean for the contest or just general publishing?
Contest and in general.
Write what you love. Is number one.
Mm-hmm.
I sat in the audience at a panel at at World Fantasy early 2000s, where a bunch of editors said, please don't write vampires fiction. Don't send it to us. We are not buying it. The vampire genre is dead, pun intended. And then Twilight came out 1 year later, right? And so we don't know what is actually saturated. Write what you love. Now, I think it is excellent advice that you should have your own take on it. You should add to the conversation. This goes for whatever genre you're writing in, whether it's vampire fiction or whether it's mysteries or whatever. You should be read in that genre and then be adding something. Say, where can I take it in a different way? What is my mark upon this genre? Asking yourself that and asking where your passions are, that will lead you to add your distinctive stamp, I think is going to lead you to writing something that will work regardless of what the genre is.
Great.
Okay,
yes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
This is more of a personal writing style question, but how many words do you generally write per day?
I've been told by one person that we should never answer that question. Well, partly because then you sit there and say, well, I can't hit that goal, so I can't write. I asked, I think it was Fred Pohl a long time back when I was a teenager. And he says he tries to write 1,000 words a day. I think that's a nice number. But you have to understand, who was it? I'll get his first name all wrong. Taika Waititi.
Taika Waititi.
Yeah, did I get it
The
right?
director? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, he said that he sat in front of a blank screen on Final Draft for 8 hours, and that's a day's work for him. It happens. So there's that. Frankly, you got to follow Todd McCaffrey's first law: allow yourself to be bad. Then Todd McCaffrey's 0th law, which is write what you love. But I wouldn't sit there and say, I only wrote 20,000 words today. I'm a slacker. Just write it. You will find, personally, what I found is that I'll get to a point where I think I'm done, 1,500 words. And then if I just give myself a bit of a nudge, I can get another 1,500 words. So.
And it gets faster with practice. I have data on the first story I ever dictated. I dictated 6 words per minute. Today, if I don't do 30 words per minute, I feel like I'm failing. I have had 50 words per minute days. One story, I had 100 words per minute with practice. So if you set a goal today, set a larger one next month.
All right, cool. Thank you.
I was just wondering, like, how do you react when you find that your writing seems to be getting a little repetitive as you go along the story, short or not, just enough? How do you try to like spice it up, like trying to make it less competitive if you're like getting to that point?
Well, what I would suggest is, because there tend to be cycles of things, try-fail cycles. And what you do is you keep upping the stakes so that it's not just the same thing, it's something bigger, and the failure is bigger as well.
Kill somebody.
Okay.
Changing the setting always really helps for me. If I'm in the middle of a book and I'm like, I feel like I've had too many people, sitting and talking about something, then I move to a new location.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Now I just got so I'm sorry for the rest of you that we won't be able to answer your questions, but several of these people will be at our booth tomorrow from 11 a.m. till 5 p.m. and you're welcome to come over and talk to them and get other questions answered. But anyway, thank you very much. Any last words from our panelists here? We've got
please submit.
Yeah.
And don't feel like I'm not ready. You are ready. The worst that can happen is you get a rejection and you learn something from it. The best that can happen is you can surprise yourself. Volume 31, the best volume. One of our members in that book, it was literally his first submission ever. So we don't hate him much, but you're ready to try.
Great, and thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Brandon Sanderson, Todd McCaffrey, Kary English, Martin Shoemaker, Eric James Stone, and Darci Stone, Wulf Moon, and ZT Rock. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Writers of the Future podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We've also been syndicated on the United Public Radio Network, where you can find these podcasts as well. I also want to thank Carnation for sponsoring this show. Their support is very much appreciated. Writers of the Future series can be purchased wherever books are sold in the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, and South Africa, and available everywhere via Amazon.com. Writers and Illustrators of the Future are contests created by L. Ron Hubbard to provide a means for the aspiring writer and artist to be seen and acknowledged. It is free to enter and open to amateur short story writers and artists of science fiction or fantasy. Again, thank you very much, Salt Lake City FanX.